This is a production of WKNO Memphis. Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
The local real estate market after the Great Recession. Tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by a number of real estate professionals to talk about the state of the real estate market. I'll start with Joe Steffner, President-elect Mar. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
David Umstead, Vice President for Lending of Triumph Mortgage. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Kim Grant Brown, President of the Home Builders Association. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And Bill Dries, Senior Reporter with the Memphis Daily News. So let me go to each of you from your various perspectives on just the state of the real estate economy and all its sort of facets. And we were talking before the show that it's September of '08, so 6 years ago that Lehman Brothers fell. We were actually joking about where we were when that happened. So we're 6 years later, a huge recession and a very real estate-centric recession. I'll start with you. Where are we 6 years later?
I would say that Memphis is recovering slowly and gradually, which is not bad. And we've got a long way to go, hopefully. The rest of the country is making bigger strides in certain areas, lesser strides in other, but it's we're kind of in the middle of that, and if the economy hangs on and continues to grow, then we're going to grow out of everything that we've started, we hope.
Okay, and we'll come back more, but again,
okay.
your perspective from a lending point of view, a mortgage point of view, clearly, I mean, it was one of the worst hit areas, both as professionals within the mortgage and the lending world, but also the foreclosure crisis and the impact from Wall Street and so on. But where are we now?
Right. Well, we've seen a lot of different regulations come in on the lending side. Some of them are good, some of them are a little bit overboard, but overall, I think the Memphis market we may not go back to the good old days of 2000, 2008, but we may be entering a new normal now where it's more seasonal. You've got second and third quarter, your strongest quarters of the year. First and fourth quarters are a little bit slower, but it's just an adjustment, and I think that we do our part as mortgage lenders to try to make sure to still get people into homes and people can still qualify for homes. So.
Yeah. We'll come back to some of that. But Kim, from your point of view, the construction, lot availability, a whole lot of it, but your general sense of where we are compared to where we were some years ago.
Well, we're definitely heading in the right direction. It's been a lot of doom and gloom on the home building side for a very long time now, but there's a lot more optimism in the market now. Inventory levels are very low, and so hopefully we're going to see a big spike in construction over the next couple of years.
Yeah, and for all of you, I mean, the impact of mortgage rates, we've been at these historically low mortgage rates, and I'll turn to the banker here, and we joked before the show that, early in the year, the Daily News and other people were writing, and we'd done some forums that, by the end of the year, rates will be approaching 5%. They're actually, I think they fell last week.
They're fantastic right now. The 30-year fixed rate mortgage is in the low 4s. The 15-year fixed rate mortgage is the mid to low 3s. Right. They've been telling us it will go up for the past 6 years, but prime interest rate has been at 3.25% since January of 2009.
Yeah.
So that's unprecedented. We've been in a fantastic rate environment. We still are. And I think it'll probably stay that way until the Federal Reserve decides to ratchet prime rate up.
Right. Which still, you get, at that point, and I know you're mostly focused on commercial, but just on the residential side, people talk about, it could go up to 5%, 5.5%. Sadly, I'm old enough to remember when I got a 5% mortgage or 5.5% mortgage and thought it was the greatest thing ever. I can remember 8 and 9%. How does that impact on the residential side, the psychology of changing interest rates, and then segue into the commercial side and the impact there?
The psychology for everybody is that we've gotten used to the low rates, and so everybody has, over the past 3 or 4 years, has been refinancing, and so people, the lenders who have been in that business have been, and the closing attorneys have been having good, strong years. A lot of that's over now because people have gone ahead and refinanced their homes or whatever that are going to, and so as the interest rates rise, I think that two things will happen. First of all, people have already refinanced that wanted to. Second is people will be a little shyer about buying a home at first, and they'll get used to the rising rates. But it also will start shutting more people out. Right now, the way things are, banks are more picky about who gets a loan. You know, all the regulations that came in with the recession have driven people to multifamily and apartments rather than getting a house. And so as the rates go up, then it will shut more people out. So it's probably not a good thing for growing the economy, and that's why the rates have remained low.
Yeah. The impact of those low rates on the commercial side.
On the commercial side, it's not as big a deal.
Okay.
The people who are going to buy a building are going to buy a building. Obviously, the higher the rates go, the less the return that the buyer gets, and it affects cap rates. It affects everything having to do with buying a building, but it's not the end of the world because they'll start raising rents or whatever.
From home builders, and then I'll let Bill in here. Kim, that perception that rates might be going up and that must drive you nuts on some level when you're trying to build and sell homes. That it went from 4 to 4.25. I mean, or it went from 4.5 to. And I'm not saying those aren't big numbers, but they're still so low. But what about borrowing and availability of money in terms of financing big subdivisions? I mean, that side of it, not the individual residential mortgage, but the financing of projects. How does that stand, and what is that availability for builders like yourself?
Well, if you are able to get a construction loan, the rates are incredibly low. They're very competitive. The banks are very competitive. Now we've got multiple offers from multiple banks wanting to do deals for us. The big difference, though, in the pre-2008 to now is that they're requiring more money down. You used to be able to get a 100% construction loan. That's a thing of the past. That just doesn't happen anymore. On the land development side, they're just, again, requiring more money down. 2 years ago, it was near impossible to get a development loan. And now banks are starting to loosen up. They're starting to get out there. They're wanting those back on their books. They're wanting that income from that. So the low interest rates are definitely helping because we pay construction loans a lot like a home buyer pays a mortgage. And our rates are incredibly low, unlike in the early 80s when construction loan rates were 19 to 21%. I mean, they were insane. I'm just saying that the builders have been very fortunate that at least we didn't have to endure that over the last several years.
Bill.
So we've talked a lot about the new normal, but it sounds like we're not quite there yet, and in the interim there might be a step where people kind of think, okay, are we going backwards or forwards before we settle into that? Is that an accurate read on where this is financially?
I would say definitely in the residential real estate market. At MAR, we check those numbers every month, as we go along, and there's been a roller coaster ride. I mean, they go up, they go down, and overall, there's a gradual rising in the amount of activity and the amount of homes being sold, but it's not as exciting as it is in other cities. So there's a catch-up that we're waiting to happen, and we hope that the new norm is what's going on a year from now and not what it is right now, if that makes sense.
One thing we've got to do is get the first-time home buyer back into the equation, or more so. They're kind of the engine of the real estate market. When a first-time home buyer purchases a house, that allows that person to sell their house, move up to a bigger house. It kind of creates this trickle-up effect. So you see a lot of kids graduate from college and they're saddled with student loan debt, which makes it a little more difficult to borrow money to buy a house. So that's a kind of another prong that needs to be worked on. But getting that first-time home buyer back into the cycle is crucial.
And so. What do you say to a first-time home? Because I would imagine you're used to dealing with people who have seen this go up and down and have reacted to it. What do you say to them about this environment?
The first-time home buyer right now is in a great position to go out. Interest rates are remarkably low. I think the first-time home buyer doesn't realize how good they really are and what they can actually afford. For the most part, you can buy a starter home and your monthly payment is going to be lower than what you're paying rent at your apartment. And so it's just going to be getting those first-time home buyers off the fence to where they'll actually make that move and dive in and buy a home. So
one thing I would add to that is that the biggest obstacle is that, as you mentioned earlier, you could get a loan, a house loan in 2003, 2004 for zero down. Can't do that now. You got to put 20% down, and so that's keeping a lot of younger people out of the market.
Well,
that's actually one of the misconceptions that's out there.
Now we have controversy.
Yeah, good. Glad to know. My son glad to know
exactly.
that.
Well, you're right. I mean, that's a good point because a lot of people think that you've got to have 20% put down on a home, which is it's just not accurate. You can get an FHA loan for 3.5% down.
If you're a first-time buyer?
No, you
Just
can,
anyone?
anyone can get that
Yeah.
as long as they don't have another FHA loan. Obviously, they have to qualify for it.
Yeah.
If you're a veteran and you qualify for VA benefits, you can get a 100% loan.
Yeah.
Conventional loans, typically that's the one where people think you got to put 20% down to avoid PMI. You only have to put down 5%.
So where does that perception come from? I mean, Joe's obviously
Yeah.
pretty learned. I have that perception too. Is it the media? I mean, some people
I
blame
think
that.
so. I think
it's
so.
my
You know,
fault.
after the crash in 2008,
Yeah.
it was never the case, but for some reason that was.
Right.
Now it's true you have to put 20% down to avoid PMI.
Okay. Which is private mortgage insurance, which is
private
a
mortgage
fee
insurance.
that gets put on there to protect the banks and the
That's
underwriter
correct.
and so on.
In case
Okay.
of default, it protects the bank. So,
Okay.
there's a little bit higher interest rate or higher monthly payment associated with it, but you
Yeah.
can still buy a house.
But the standards and the process of getting a loan, that is more rigorous now, don't you think? I mean, and I would say that just from personal experience of having refinanced over the years, I remember buying or refinancing years ago. You could do it all by fax. I mean, it was
Right.
just crazy how simple it was. The last couple times, over however many years that we refinanced, it was much more rigorous, and there were a lot more questions, a lot more paperwork.
Right. Yeah, the difference now is you actually have to have a job, and you actually have to make the money that you said you
Right.
make. So there's a lot more verification that
Yeah.
goes into it.
Is that a bad thing?
Personally, I think it's a good thing. It,
Yeah.
it creates it takes away the chance of having another bubble.
Right, right.
People were getting loans that didn't need to have loans.
Yeah.
But it's a responsibility on the lender and the borrower to make sure that they can afford this house and they can make the payment.
Yeah. Would you say that from a building point of view, and that those requirements, because they are higher than they were, that's a good thing? I mean,
Yes and no. I think that we absolutely needed to add more requirements than what we had previously. I mean, I knew we were in trouble in 2007 when one of my homeowners was talking about how they couldn't believe they could buy a house because they just foreclosed on one 9 months ago. And obviously from my perspective, I was sitting there going, "Oh my gosh, wow!"
run this check to the bank.
Right, and so obviously we needed to get away from that. That was just ludicrous.
Yeah.
But now some of the restrictions, especially on self-employed people, if you're self-employed, it's very difficult to get a loan. If you're, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe if you're self-employed, you have to have had your company for at least 2 years. Is that correct?
That's correct in most cases.
In most cases. And so, and the way it's just a lot more complicated. So there's certain restrictions in that which I think are a little too far, but
Yeah.
absolutely we did need to up the ante some.
Yeah, Bill.
I'm curious, though, we went through a phase long before the bubble, actually, where there was this idea that everybody should own a home. Should everybody own a home?
Everybody should have, if they want to own a home and they are financially responsible, they should be able to own a home. Now, if you are not financially responsible, you should not own a home. I guess that's I don't really know how else to put it besides that. But
I agree 100%.
yeah, I do not think every single person should own a home. Not every person can pay their bills on time. In that case, then I don't think you should own a home. So.
Right. And obviously the bubble has had a whole ripple effect in terms of how communities are built, in terms of how communities are financed. So what is the new normal going forward beyond what you deal with, beyond that, in terms of how we build communities?
Are you talking development
Yeah,
or as far as?
in terms of development.
Okay, so in the past, you would have a lot development that would have 180 lots that would be put online all at one time. All of them would be finished at one time. They would be sold at one time. That is especially in Memphis. That's a thing of the past. You're going to see land development be more in phases. So it could be 4 phases of 40 lots that are released over a period of, say, 4 years, instead of just having all at one time. And that is definitely going to be the big difference. We're already seeing that happening right now. So.
Right.
It's also a trend toward the the multi-use town center type strategy that's being put into use in big cities. I think Germantown's trying to do that. You have a central core, you have office space, you have apartments right there together with it, and everybody walks to do whatever they want to do, retail. Those kinds of things.
Well, and Harbortown is an
Exactly.
older
Exactly.
example. that
Yes,
we've talked about.
that's
But
correct.
there are offices so much down there, but there's that mix of apartments and homes and so on.
New urbanism, I think.
Because
is what-
everybody doesn't need a home at this point in their life.
Right.
They might need an apartment. Maybe they're a student. Maybe, whatever their life situation is. And maybe they can move into an apartment in a community such as Harbortown. If they love it, then move into a house.
Right.
It's good to have a mixed use development. It's healthy
Right.
for the community.
And from a lending point of view, I mean, there is this boom in apartment construction nationally. There are more people living in apartments. I assume are you all a part of that? I mean, have you guys had to retool and say, hey, we're not just going to survive on single residential mortgages. We want to get in on both sides. We want
Right.
to finance apartment construction or home construction.
Right, yeah. Our bank has a commercial lending side, and they do a lot of business with home builders, and they finance pretty much anything that makes sense. So yes, I mean, we've got one focus in residential real estate, and then another arm of our bank
Right.
that takes care of commercial
And
lending.
you do construction of your company, separate from being president of Home Builder. Your company, you build homes, but you also build apartments,
Correct.
right?
Yep.
Do you have people within Home Builders who think that's not
No,
okay? I mean,
no.
that's
There's
all
a lot of home builders that actually do apartments and
Yeah.
home building.
Right.
The good thing about that is it helps you weather the storms with home building. Home building is very cyclical.
Yeah.
There's a small recession in the early 80s. There was a small recession in the late 90s, and then now this long recession that we've been in.
Yeah.
And so the apartments, they're kind of the static. When home building is not doing real great, then apartments tend to do better, and then vice versa.
Yeah.
So it kind of allows you to hedge your bets.
Yeah, and maybe I'll put you on the spot on this. And a bigger question, we talk about real estate in narrow sense of home building and so on, but it's a huge part of the economy. I mean, the number of people employed, both from whether a carpenter or a loan officer or a realtor, you talk about the tax base, all that. I mean, do you see, I guess we've said this, but do you see from a real estate point of view getting anywhere close to where the volume was in terms of the numbers of sales and so on? Or is it always going to be, is it going to just be a little bit less than it was in that pre-2008 boom?
It's hard to say. There's so many things going on in Memphis right now,
Right.
especially when you look at all the growth in North Mississippi,
Yeah.
all of the pull of Mississippi to residents of Tennessee and businesses from Tennessee, all
Yeah.
of which is going to get much stronger as this 269 and 385 combine and all that, which is next year. There's going to be a ton of land down there, a lot of land that's available for development, and there's going to be, not only will there be industrial development down there as our industrial base continues to move to Mississippi, but they're talking about pursuing office tenants, and there'll be
Yeah.
a lot of single family down there as well. So that will have a big impact on what happens to Memphis. So Memphis has got to not only keep the people it has, but
Yeah.
then try and get things going again back to where they were. So it's a challenge.
What about the impact of schools? We've had this big ruckus of the schools and the changing schools, and we actually talked before the show about how all the schools kind of launched without a lot of noise or anything. But how much has that impacted where people want to maybe build? Is it shifted things around, or was that not a big factor?
I think the biggest thing is that whenever all this was going on, there was so much in the media about it. Uncertainty causes people to just sit there and do nothing.
Yeah.
And so now we're starting to see things move. And I think a lot of it is the schools, but a lot of it is just they know where the child will go, regardless of where they're moving to. So if it's Arlington, they know that their child's going to go to their schools.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's been the biggest factor. I think that's allowed people to get off the fence and start purchasing homes.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say at Mar, that was a big issue with people not knowing what to tell people that were asking about
Right.
houses in the neighborhoods. Probably the single biggest issue was Germantown High School.
Yeah.
Is that going to be in Germantown? Is it going to be in the city or the county? Is it?
Right.
That got worked out, and once the lines were drawn, then people kind of settled down. Where
Yeah.
they go.
Yeah. Do you see that with people coming in looking for homeless?
Yeah.
That's obvious. I mean, it's always been a big factor. There's nothing new about that, but it was a bigger factor, I assume, for a
Kim
while.
was right. There was a lot of uncertainty. I had people call me that their kids went to a certain school, and then the next day they're not going to be able to go to that school. So they're trying to sell their house and move into that different school district.
Yeah. Okay. Bill.
And you talked about 269. I was in the Chickasaw Industrial Park, just on the other side of the state line earlier this week for the opening of the Roxel plant there as well. The road construction was happening right beside it, even as they were cutting the ribbon there. There's already so much going on in that industrial park as it stands now.
Fascinating.
What do you think the mix is between the manufacturing and the residential? There's some residential there now, largely rural in scale.
I don't know that there is some manufacturing. The biggest thing that's going down there, though, is industrial development. There's a huge development that's being planned right now and is going to happen in Olive Branch. It's at Hacks Cross and Goodman Road, and it's going to be, it's like 200 acres, 4.3 million square feet. It's being done by Hillwood, but that thing is just going to be, it's going to draw people down there, and you know, that's just continuing past what's already happened in Olive Branch, which is the hottest part of the industrial real estate market. So that will happen and continue to draw big companies down there, like McKesson that went down there, like you know, a number of others. That, you know, if you look at the percentages, 70% of the industrial deals that are done in the city right now are done in Mississippi, which is a huge change from 10 years ago when they're all done in Memphis. Nobody wanted to be in Mississippi, but they are so aggressive with incentives and they give them so easily and so freely versus what happens in Memphis that you know, people are just going, why put up with the headache? Let's go to Mississippi. It's continuing.
And yet people, you know, we've talked quite a bit about the pilots incentives on the show, and people say that Memphis would have, there are a certain group of people who have a totally different perspective, that Memphis is just giving away the store. But that's not happening compared to what's going on in Mississippi.
No, here's the thing. There are two kinds of people in Memphis. There are the glass is half full, or the glass is half empty.
Right.
The half empty people want to have they want the pensions, and they want the for the retirees, they want the benefits, and they want the pilots to stop. You know, you got that set of people. You have the other people that have the bigger picture, that if we'll hang on and realize that the rest of the company is booming in cities our size, and it's all going to come to Memphis, and we'll continue to play the game with pilots and be more aggressive with those things in order to compete with Mississippi, then we're going to grow this economy and we're going to grow out of this. But to the extent that we start thinking about that stuff and giving in to them, then we're just going to, people will shy away from us because there's too much internal turmoil, you know, if you will, inside the city.
From a building point of view, I mean, I don't know if you've done construction in Mississippi, or I mean, what's that like compared to doing it in Shelby County? Is it from a construction point of view simpler too?
It
Why?
is. I'm trying to think the easiest way to explain it. They group their inspections together instead of having them all separately. So you're getting the same inspections, it's just it's a simpler process.
Right.
Getting land development approved is a quicker process. And the biggest reason is it is less expensive. Because of the cost of utilities in Shelby County and the surrounding areas, or Shelby County really, because of the cost of utilities and because of the fees that the municipalities charge, just right off the bat, without moving an inch of ground, it's $10,000 more per lot. So if you think
in Shelby County compared to Mississippi,
correct. So if, say, I'm just going to pick on Collierville for a minute. If I'm building in Collierville, it's automatically, I can build the same house in Collierville that I was going to build in Mississippi, and it's going to be $10,000 more if it's the exact same product on the exact same size lot, just for utilities and just for the municipality cost.
Yeah, Bill.
And I think in terms of the North Mississippi development, I think in keeping up with what's on the Tennessee side of the state line and what's on the Mississippi state line, we might lose sight of the fact that Memphians work in those plants as well.
Right.
That's right.
And the economic impact, while Mississippi has a state income tax, those folks still work and spend their money.
Right.
What happened, you know, it's amazing to me that Memphis has all this great infrastructure that's been built, and there's nobody around here can touch it for industrial is what I'm talking about now, because it is what drives our real estate business in the commercial side. And yet the people that are reaping the benefits of it is Mississippi. They're the ones that are getting the taxes, and so it hurts the city tremendously. So, you know, what the answer to that is, I don't know. And you know, the other thing is that the state tends to say, we don't want to give incentives for people that are renewing their leases. And you know, what we've got to realize is that nobody else in the state has a competition for jobs in their same city, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So you know, Nashville doesn't compete with Nashville, and you know, Knoxville and Chattanooga don't compete with each other, but Memphis competes with Memphis.
Yeah.
Mississippi, which is still Memphis.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Just a couple minutes left. the foreclosure fallout from the recession, part of what happened, we talked a lot about the apartments, but also the single-family homes that were bought up and are turned into rentals. I'm not sure who I'm going to look at for this question. I guess I'll start with you. That dynamic, and especially the hedge funds, huge, and this is a national phenomenon, hedge funds who bought up homes and are renting them out. You're nodding, so I'll put it on you. What do you think, how does that play out over the next few years, that these hedge funds might own as many, thousands of homes in a given community, Memphis included? It's not always entirely clear. How does that play out if they start selling those homes back into the market?
Right. It's certainly very scary,
Yeah.
But I think it speaks to the affordability of Memphis too. If we could get our own citizens buying these houses, living in them, or renting them out, it's always better than having a group come in and buy a couple hundred homes, and they may want to decide to get rid of them all one day. It's something to watch.
Yeah. I'm curious too. Les, just a minute left here. Kim, I've heard other people talk about. I think you and I have talked about it in another setting. The availability of labor. That you had a period there where people who are carpenters and plumbers and all those trades just couldn't get work, and now that the economy is getting better, what's the status of that, of employment and getting people in to do the work now that, as you're saying, the economy is inching forward and you're having more work?
Absolutely. At the peak, we did a little over 6,000 permits. Right now, this year, we're hoping to do about 800 to 900, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
We're still significantly down, but as we've increased, we have lost so much of our labor force that we're starting to see the shortages.
Yeah.
It's not as bad as it is in other parts of the country yet.
Yeah.
I think once we hit that 1,000 permit mark, once we start inching up, we're really going to start seeing some issues.
Okay.
But right now, it's not killing us.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you all. Thanks for being here. Thank you for joining us. Join us again next week. Good night.